There is emerging evidence in many countries that peripheral communities are on a worse trajectory health-wise than other areas. You can definitely see this in the UK, you see this in the US, and interestingly, you also see it in rural Denmark. And here we make it, the authors of this study make an important point about the role that deindustrialization and population loss has had in a widening mortality gap between urban and rural populations in Denmark. So to summarize, in the evidence that I've reviewed, I see no evidence from whole country or whole regional evaluations that reconfiguration has improved mortality outcomes. The limited mortality evidence we have is not supportive of emergency care centralization at the whole population level, and my colleague Dr. Vaughan will obviously break that out now into the evidence at the subgroup condition-specific level. The evidence base is weak, we have to admit this, but there have been very few studies, mostly with weak designs. The Danish study is, in my opinion, the strongest study published to date. It's obviously very hard to map from context to context as well. Ireland is a very sparsely populated country with 72 people per kilometre squared. Denmark may be in the middle, and obviously we all know that the Netherlands is much more densely populated. And if we're talking about the situation I'd mentioned earlier, where we close a smaller hospital and now patients have to travel 100 kilometers, obviously that's a very different context from closing a small urban hospital, which is right next to a large urban hospital. There is remarkably little evidence about balancing impact. So all the focus we see is on mortality, but we see very little evidence about the inequities that are caused across income groups, age groups, or geographical groups by centralization. We see very little on the timeliness of care, the impact on environment of having extra cars on the road, the impact on staff in terms of stress and retention. We see a little bit about overcrowding at hub hospitals, and it is not encouraging. There is evidence about the effects of overspill. We see very little about the efficiency of mitigation measures. So, for example, is it efficient to convert smaller emergency department to minor injury units or acute assessment units? And we see very little about the impacts on patients or carer experience or disrupted relationships with local providers. What we do see in qualitative research is consistent concerns about procedural, or what sometimes people call epistemic, injustice. So poor public engagement, a focus on informing by experts rather than listening, diminishing the role of public representatives and politicians and campaigners as populism, cherry-picking studies so that policies can be sold as evidence-based, inferring whole population benefits from a very small group of complex care conditions like major trauma, acute myocardial infarction, and stroke. Ambiguous definitions of success, and I have seen many papers where the policy starts with, it will save lives, moving to, well, at least it doesn't kill anybody. And you can see here, well, if that's your goal, just to avoid killing people, let's just stick with what we've currently got. And then a lack of candor about the historical decisions that led to the impetus for centralization. For example, why do these smaller units look the way they do? Why are they staffed the way they are? Someone made decisions that led to that situation. And then a lack of transparency sometimes about the role of vested interests, for example, medical schools and professional bodies behind the scenes in the decision-making process. And then a lack of accountability and a plan B in the case of failure. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for listening.